Hello, everyone, and I hope that you're doing well. And I also hope that you're preparing well for your examination as well. Now, this lesson here is a continuation of the crash course in biology in preparation for your examination. And so, what we're going to look at today is evolution, natural selection, and genetic engineering. All right. And so, first thing we're going to dive into is the objectives, but we're going to look at objectives in terms of general objectives. All right, and so one of the first things you need to do is to understand natural selection, mutation, gene flow, and genetic drift as mechanism for biological evolution. The next thing you need to know as well is to understand the evidence for biological evolution, the importance and applications of biological evolution in terms of healthcare, food technology, forensic science, and conservation biology. The next thing you need to know as well is to appreciate the social and ethical implications of genetic engineering. All right, and now let's talk about some specific objectives. And so, coming from these broad objectives, one, you need to explain how genetic variation arises. Two, explain why genetic variation is important. And three, to define a species. Also, you need to know as well is how to describe how new species are formed, also to explain how natural selection plays a role in biological evolution, and also to distinguish between natural and artificial selection. And two more on the list is one is that you also need to describe how genetic engineering can be used to change the traits of an organism. And the final thing you need to know as well is to discuss the possible advantages and disadvantages of genetic engineering. All right, so let's dive into the meat of the matter right now. And so the first thing you need to know right here is genetic variation. And so these are some of the things that you already know. All right, but just to help us to understand the content of what is coming up later, is one that genetic variation is what we call the hereditary differences within a species. Now, for example, what we're talking about are those phenotypical traits. For example, human beings. Some of us are tall, some of us are short, some have a blue iris, some of us has a dark brown iris or a dark iris. Some of us earlobes are attached, some of us earlobe are detached. Some of us may have curly hair, some have straight hair, and so on. All right, so these are the differences between a species. All right, so that's what variation is. All right, the important thing about variation, right, is that variation is typically a rise or a result of sexual reproduction and mutation. Now, remember, in sexual reproduction, especially in meiosis, we have what we call crossing over and synapsis in prophase 1. All right, I'm just kind of linking the genetics to this. And so, because of crossing over and synapsis, we have exchange of genetic material or genes between chromosomes. And so we arise with differences. Even though you may be the same mother and father, we have differences. All right? So sexual reproduction definitely leads to variation among the species. Mutation is also another one, all right? Because mutation results in change in the DNA or the genetic makeup of the organism. So that could lead to some form of variation as well. All right? Now, again, important thing we need to understand right here is the importance of genetic variation. And one, genetic variation promotes adaptation. Because of the differences among a species, some organism in that same species can end up survive better in a certain environment because of the differences. All right? Because again, if you're tall and you want to pick something off a tree, you maybe easily reach a tree. So you are better surviving to get food from tall trees in that environment. Persons who are short may have a problem. All right? All right, a person who can run fast, for example, if you have to run for your food, yeah, those persons get the food first. The slow one, I'm very sorry, but you're not going to get any food if you have to run for your food, you see? So the differences among us can help us to survive or adapt better for certain environmental conditions, all right? The second thing is that genetic variation makes it less likely that a change in environmental conditions will wipe out an entire species. In other words, variation helps to prevent extinction. All right? And so it kind of ties with the first one. Adaptation leads to better survival. All right? And prevents extinction. So they kind of interlocked or interrelated if you think about it. All right. Next thing on the list that we're going to look at right here now is what is a species? And a species is a closely related organisms that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. All right, that means the offspring is able to reproduce among themselves and able to produce more offsprings. That's what it is about. All right, so typically now some examples of non-viable species or non-fertile species. So just for your understanding sake, for example, ostrich and a dove. They are birds, of course, but they are different types of birds with different physical features, and hence it's difficult for them to mate. Horse and donkey. Yes, horse and donkey can mate and produce a mule, but the mule is not able to reproduce, all right, because it's infertile. A man and a cow, Lord Jesus, this is an abomination. Of course, as you know that, we should not even think about it. But just for example's sake, a man cannot mate with a cow. Even if it do happen, Jesus Lord, even if it do happen, the offspring, if it do come, I doubt the offspring will ever form because of difference in chromosome anyhow, because the sperm is not able to fertilize the egg. But if it do happen, the offspring that comes can never reproduce. All right, a mango tree and orange, for example. All right, because of difference again in pollen and chromosomes and all of that, it will not happen. It's not viable. All right. So those are some examples. All right. So the species must be the same species for you to be able to reproduce. All right, or interbreed. All right. Now, next thing on the list now is how new species are formed, and this is very important now. Now, the formation of new species, we call it speciation. All right, and speciation is caused by physical geographic separation. That's one way. One way. So one way is geographic separation, physical geographic separation. So you can separate by rivers, you can separate by desert, all right? And also for some organism colonizing new islands, all right? Or you may have a rise in mountain range or hill or some barriers, whatever that barrier is. It could be even a forest. A forest could separate one set of organism from a next set, right? And importantly, all right, the speciation is influenced by loss of habitat or formation of new habitat. So for migration, for example, if you migrate, then you may separate from a next species. Or if you lose your habitat, all right, then you may have to move from this environment, right, or ecosystem into a new ecosystem, which may lead to now a formation of a new species. All right? Now, this is an example here. These cows are separated by a river, all right? Even though the cow on the right say come over, because I don't know for what reason, but the one on the left say I can't fly or I can't swim, so there is no way it can reach over. So notice they're different, all right? And so on these different banks of a river, you may have the brown and white cow, or the red and, you may call it red. Well, it's brown cow, right? Brown and white cow may have that species on that side, and on the right, you may have just black and white or gray and white cow, all right, producing on that side. So we have separation of the species, all right? So, but if they come together now, definitely they may have, I don't know what red and brown gives, but yeah, you could have a mixture of that, or you could have a totally brown and a totally white or a totally black, and all that thing could happen. But since they're separated, all right, then that's definitely to two different species altogether, and those species will be maintained, all right? Now, the next thing we need to know here is how new species are formed. A continuation from what we just looked at. So the first method we looked at was separation by physical land or geographic barriers, right? The next one is ecological and behavioral differences. So besides separating by physical means, we also can be in the same space, but because of difference in behavior or the ecological differences, then what we may have is different species. So guess what? For example, we're talking about mating season. Not all animals will mate or have a mating season for the same time. So therefore, when one is mating probably in the winter, one is mating in the summer, and so there's no chance for them to come together and mate. So that again causes a difference in species. All right, you're gonna stay with your gene pool. You stay with your gene pool. So we have two different species that occurring at the same time. Also, what we We could have reproductive isolation. For example, a small dog versus a very large dog, right? You know, because the difference in body size and so on, they are different reproductively. And so they are isolated, and hence you have different species. Again, coloration is the next one. This maybe look simple, but coloration, for example, among birds, for example, right? Some birds are attracted to certain color. And if a bird do not have a certain color or look, especially male birds are the most colorful birds. The female one are normally not so colorful. So the males will have to attract the females with their color. All right. And so if the color is not so nice and vibrant, there's no way you're going to reproduce. All right. All right. And so again, a point to note here is that over time, species can also go extinct due to hunting, loss of habitat, disease. For example, the Caribbean monk seal that has been extinct. All right, so these are just some examples of ways that can affect an organism or a species over time. All right, just to make a note there. All right, some question may require for you to explain how a species may disappear or become extinct. And so these are some of the reasons. All right, now this is an example in difference in behavior. All right, and so for example, the bird on the left is a singing bird, you know, that's called a singing bird. But the one on the right is not intrigued by the voice or the singing or the sound that bird is chirping, right? And so it's not attracted to that type of bird. So therefore, the one on the right is saying that sounds horrible. And another bird may find it very interesting and want to mate with that bird. All right, so the difference in behavior can cause isolation of species. All right, and so there's no interbreeding among these birds because, again, it's different in behavior. All right, so that's an example right there. All right. Now, what we're going to look at now is the difference between evolution and natural selection. They are different. They are different, of course. So evolution now, I want you to understand the differences now. So evolution is the changes in heritable traits of an organism over successive generation. In other words, over a long period of time. So what is happening here? Evolution is saying that the traits that can pass on from one generation to the next can change. And of course, nobody says believe in evolution because I don't believe in evolution. I believe in natural selection because it's more logical. Because again, why I don't believe in evolution? For example, if you believe you come from ape, the big question is why we still have apes and have humans separated. We have them separately. So why not the apes keep changing and why not the humans keep changing? Well, that's a different day for a debate. So if you want to debate on that, we can talk about that. All right. Now, natural selection now is more plausible to me because natural selection states that is the adaptation of organism to changes or pressure in the environment. All right. And this is the mechanism for evolution. So I'm going to explain natural selection much more and going to understand why I believe more in natural selection rather than evolution itself. All right. All right. So let's look at a few things here now. And these are factors that influence evolution. One is natural selection. So natural selection can cause evolution. We have mutation, we have gene flow, and genetic drift. However, I'm going to look at gene flow and genetic drift first because they're kind of much shorter, and I want to spend more time on natural selection and mutation. All right, so jump into gene flow first. And gene flow now is the introduction of new alleles or genes by means of interbreeding of species from one population to another. All right, and point to note is that this results in a change in the composition of the gene pool of that population. So you're bringing something new that wasn't there before. All right, and so this is an example. We have two different colors of butterflies, blue one and the orange one. All right, and so the orange one may introduce new alleles into the blue population, and then eventually what you may have is a blue and orange butterfly or mixture of blue and orange or spots or whatever. You know, you could have different in species popping up, and that is called evolution. So over time, you may realize that there's no more blue, there's no more orange, but a total different, which is a blue and blue with orange spot or orange with blue spots or a stripe, whatever, you know. Yeah, but that's how gene flow works. You're carrying new alleles or new genes from one population to another. All right. The other one now is genetic drift. Again, very simple. And this is a process by which random events or chances influence change in the frequency of alleles in a population. I'm going to show you a demonstration. But this is drifting away from what was there before to something new. So think about the word drifting. You're drifting from one thing to another one. That's what it is. But the drifting is caused by random events or chances. So for example, you may have an introduction of disease within a population, which is just a random act, and that wipe out an entire set of species and leave only one, and so on. All right. So let's look at this example now. And this example, you notice the original population, a mixture of pretty much equal mixture of blue and orange, right? And then some of the butterflies may migrate. So you have migration taking place first, pretty much relatively the same. But after a few generations, what you may realize is that the blue ones disappear and the orange one remains. Now, the thing that may cause this again is a random thing. It could be a disaster. It could be a natural disaster. It could be a particular introduction of a predator that only feeds on the blue ones. All right. And then eventually the blue one disappear and leave only with now only the orange one. So this year, again, blue extinct, orange one remains. All right. And so an example of this genetic drift is also called a bottleneck. So you can search up what is bottleneck and you'll see that. So it's like a chance. You're throwing a dice, for example, and only a possibility of getting certain things. All right. So the blue end up disappearing over a period of time for this example. All right. Now, natural selection now. Natural selection influences a population to retain genes which makes it adapted to that habitat. All right? So that's natural selection. So when you understand this now, is that natural selection influences a population to retain genes which makes it adaptable or adapted to its habitat. Now, for natural selection, you have different features or different traits within the same population, and the best one will survive. So natural selection normally preserves useful adaptation. All right, so that's very important. Now, the note part in green is very important again, is that genetic variation provides the template for natural selection to act on. Because again, once you have differences among the species, then the differences may make one better than the other one to be adapted to that environment. All right, and that's how I believe also in natural selection. There must be the presence of different features that allow one to better survive than the other one. That is logical. That makes sense. Yeah, that makes plenty sense to me. All right. Again, well, next thing we're gonna jump on is mutation right here. And mutation now, as we said, influence evolution as well. Mutation is a change in DNA sequence of an organism. So the DNA changes. And that, again, it can be a random thing, especially during cell division. Now, the effects of mutation can be beneficial, harmful, or neutral, depending on the environment or the need of adaptation. So again, let's say we have a mutation in human beings. I mean, up with 4 legs and 2 arms, right? And we have to climb trees or run faster, then that may be a plus. But however, let's say the legs or extra legs that we grow may hamper us from feeding or giving birth, then that is now a harmful thing. Something that may be popping up on mutation, for example, let's say you grow an extra finger, and the extra finger doesn't change how you hold things, or it doesn't increase or it doesn't increase or decrease your ability to do things, then that you call neutral mutation. All right? So it also depends on what you need it for. All right. But be honest with you though, I'm going to tell you the truth though. Mutation is generally not beneficial in human beings particularly, but in microorganisms, yes. All right. So this is an application of mutation right here. And this one is the antibiotic resistant bacteria, which is normally tested, by the way, on the exam sometimes. All right. So look at the first population there. You have the sensitive strain of bacteria that will be destroyed by the antibiotic, and you may have only one cell that is antibiotic resistant. And so if the antibiotic is added, it will kill the sensitive strain and leave the one that is antibiotic resistant. However, now what will happen now? The resistant one will grow and multiply. And in another case, what could happen too is that the the antibiotic resistant bacteria may also transfer their genes into the strain that was sensitive and make them now become also resistant to antibiotics. So this is one good one for you to explain in the exam, just in case it pop up again. All right. Now, what we're going to look at here now is natural selection versus artificial selection. That's a summary of what we just looked at. And in natural selection, this is again is another reason why I believe in natural selection, is because the fittest trait in a population allows organism to adapt and survive. So notice this now is a trait that causes the survival of the organism. All right, but in artificial selection now, and notice this is different from evolution here. So natural selection again allows the fittest trait to survive. Now, artificial selection now, this is selective breeding that is done by humans generally to obtain desirable traits. Now, again, the point to note, natural selection allows the fittest trait to survive, but in artificial selection, it is selected intentionally, but that trait is not necessarily beneficial to the organism, but is beneficial to the breeder. For example, us, we select what we want, but that's not necessarily the best thing for the organism. All right? Now, in terms of natural selection, this is a pretty much example, the giraffe situation. And again, let's say originally on the left, you have a population of short and long-necked giraffes. All right? This is a cassia plant, which is a plant that giraffe used to eat, that was believed in back in those days. Now, the short-necked giraffes, if food becomes scarce on the ground, the short-necked giraffe cannot find food. So eventually, they're going to die, as depicted on the right, and the long-necked ones will survive and reproduce and carry on their population. So today's date, we're not seeing no short-necked giraffes because they didn't be able to reach the food because the food on the ground becomes scarce or totally eaten. And so the ones now with short neck, they die out, and only the traits for long neck keep passing on. And so eventually, all the traits or the allele for short neck disappear, especially if it is recessive, yeah? All right. Now, our next example here of artificial selection, again, is chickens, broiler chickens, with poultry. Chickens used to be small in the 1950s, the 1970s get a little larger, in the 2000s get a little bigger. So we make chickens bigger to feed a growing population. So this is also a good thing. But again, it's a good thing to feed us so we don't die of hunger. But in terms of a chicken health, the health of a chicken is not necessarily good to have so much fat or so much meat. This sometimes they can't even walk properly. And so we grow the chicken for the benefit of us by artificially selecting genes or traits that make them bigger in a shorter period of time, right? And so it's good for us as a population, but not necessarily good for the chicken itself. All right, so notice that's the difference between natural and artificial selection. We choose traits that benefit us for artificial. Natural selection, the traits technically choose the organism for the environment. All right? All right. Now, let us look at artificial selection as some example, and look at some examples here. And so artificial selection benefits the need of the breeder, as I mentioned earlier, or humans, but not necessarily the fitness of the organism. And so some examples, local examples that you need to know. I mean, for example, Jamaica Hope was developed for the milk production. We have corn for bigger cob. We developed that over a period of time, made it look better, and so on. We have Scotch bonnet pepper that was developed for the heat and flavor. And we also have this pimento pepper. I don't remember the correct name for it, but the pimento pepper from Trinidad is a long red pepper, really, really flavorful, but there's no heat. So a person who like the taste of pepper but can't mind the heat will consume the pimento pepper, because they benefit from the flavor, but there's no heat to kind of make them be, a little bit uncomfortable. All right. We also develop drought resistance ficus, those edges, we develop them over a period of time. So they're better surviving the summertime, so they always stay green and looking healthy. All right. Now, wrapping up, going closer to where we want to be now is genetic engineering, which is the last segment on this review. And now, genetic engineering is a process of artificially modifying an organism DNA or genetic materials for a specific or desirable effect. All right. And so this is really done by us, really. All right. So it's engineering of organisms. So if, for example, as a genetic engineering is the production of insulin from bacteria. And so, for example, what you do is to pull out the insulin gene from a human cell, and then you will splice or split or open the plasmid from a bacteria and insert that gene into that DNA. All right? Because the plasmid is really a circular DNA. And the introduction of that gene or the insulin gene into the plasmid is called recombinant. All right, so it's a recombinant plasmid. So you first open it or cut it, and then you introduce it and close it. It's called recombinant plasmid. And then now we have the bacteria now that is able to produce the insulin. And so what you'll do now is to start to grow the bacteria that can produce insulin, and they extract the insulin from it. Now, a point to note, which I've seen in an exam, I think it was a multiple choice, they asked at what stage is the bacteria able to produce insulin. And right here, where you see the transgenic bacteria, that's the point when the bacteria is able to actually produce insulin, when the plasmid is reintroduced into the bacteria. So I've seen that in the multiple choice before. Well, at least more than once, I should say. All right, now example of genetic engineering again is really to reduce night blindness is an example here. So what is happening here is rice. You know, rice normally white, right? So what they do is to introduce or extract what they call the beta carotene. All right, so you know, carotene is a yellowish thing like in pumpkins and so on, right? Pumpkin, papaya. All right, so that's a special carotene that helps you with producing a lot of vitamin A. And so people consume rice on a daily. People may not like pumpkin, they may not like papaya. And so, yeah, they may prefer the rice. And so introduce the beta carotene in the rice. So people are consuming yellow rice and getting the vitamin A that from very young stage, and help prevent night blindness. So like a population that is highly affected by night blindness, this is a good way to do that. Because of course, kids prefer to eat the rice over pumpkin or papaya. You know, so definitely this is a nice way to do it. All right. Now, what we're going to look at now is, again, some advantage and disadvantage. This is the last aspect here. So advantages of genetic engineering is one, is that you can have advanced in medicine. You could have reduce of pesticide usage. All right, so if, for example, you develop plants that are resistant to fungi or plants that are resistant to certain insects, all right, so we can prevent the use of chemical pesticides. Again, we can have DNA testing done because, again, DNA testing is a form of genetic engineering where you test DNA to see who relates to who. So that's a benefit. The gene therapy, to for example, curing certain diseases, cancer and all those type of stuff. Breeding programs, you can have breeding programs to develop new organisms or new species. And again, you can have higher or faster production in a crops or animals. Again, you can have enhanced nutrients in food. So you can develop strains of food that will produce more nutrients. And so those are benefits or advantages of genetic engineering. Disadvantages now could be, one is that animals may be held in captivity, all right, because of course, and then linked to that now we could talk about the ethical concerns, and also not just ethical, but also religious concerns as well that are attached to genetic engineering, because of course you have to look at the social aspect as well. All right. And also, we can also disturb natural diversity, because if we develop a new organism, it changes the dynamics of the food chain and also our organism relate to other organisms. Because again, if you change rice, for example, a certain bird may eat that rice, but the bird itself may be, the beta carotene may be poisonous to certain organism and may kill them out. Right. So that again can disturb the natural balance of the ecosystem. Again, we can develop resistant organisms that may have no natural predators, and then them themselves may become invasive, all right? Or you want to try to destroy them by biological means, and they can't work, all right? Again, some of these development may lead to allergies in some persons, of course. And again, we also could have side effects or unknown side effects that we're not aware of. And so person may not live so long, develop cancer, other terminal diseases that we unfamiliar with, all right? And so definitely The list may continue, and you can add anything that makes sense. Really, you get a mark for that. All right. And so we're at the end of it, and I really, really thank you for being here. Thank you for watching again, and good luck on your examination. It was fun being with you this year, and of course, I will improve as I go along. So again, invite the friends over. Thank you for watching again. Talk to you soon. Good luck.